Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Lauren Knickerbocker. I'm a psychologist here at the Child Study Center. I'm one of the directors of the Early Childhood Service, and we talk to families all the time about the challenges of dinner time. So I'm going to be talking about how we can reclaim the family dinner and get everybody to the table and actually enjoy ourselves. For all of you listening, if you have questions, you can submit them anytime today by typing them into the questions pane in the control panel. That's on the right side of your screen. And we'll answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. All right, so let's get started. So today I'm going to try and cover very briefly why family mealtime is important to both our health and our well-being. I'll also talk to you about how you can set yourself up for success, and that does involve kind of thinking ahead about your table. Also thinking about what do we do about food. I know a lot of the issues that parents bring to us are about picky eating or not eating enough or eating too much, so we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about how to make a plan if you already notice bad habits. This is all a process. So if we're not starting from an ideal place, then we'll need to make a plan and think about how we can get ourselves there. And then I'll leave probably about 10 minutes at the end for question and answer. Okay. So I think a lot of people intend to make family meal times a priority in their families, and it just doesn't happen for whatever reason. But it's really helpful, I think, to think about what the benefits are to your family. One of the biggest ones is that you serve as a model for your kids and their eating behavior. And what we mean by this is that everyone has a relationship with food. We need it to live. And that relationship can be good or bad. So whether or not we're really aware of it, we really need to think about what our relationship is to food and then how we can be the best models possible for our kids. One of the other things to think about is that you are actually benefiting your child in many helpful ways, from infancy and toddlerhood all the way through adolescence. So for example, we know that eating together promotes better health choices and habits, and I'll give you guys some examples of that. One of the examples that I often give to parents because they're worried about it is that if you are somebody who eats a well-balanced meal, if you eat vegetables at dinner, if you control your portion sizes, even if your child does not necessarily like all the foods that you like, if those are presented over and over and your child sees you eating healthy, they're much more likely to make those kinds of choices as they grow up. It might not necessarily be tomorrow, but it will be something that they carry with them into adulthood. So that's one example that I think is really important. There's also a nice kind of time at family mealtime where you can check in with your kids. We know that parental monitoring continues to be really important for kids all the way through adolescence. And what I mean by that is kind of knowing what's going on in their life. Are they having good days or bad days? How is their peer group going? What's on their mind? What kind of stresses are happening? And when you have a regular family mealtime where everybody comes together, and that communication is just kind of part of your daily life, it's much easier to kind of know as the parent what's going on with your kids. One of the other things that we really think about are preventing some of the undesirable outcomes. So we know that some of our bad habits around eating can rub off on our kids as well. The biggest one we see is eating in front of the television. So we know that eating in front of the television causes people to not be as mindful of their eating. They tend to eat more. There's less conversation, obviously, so there's missed time to have that family conversation. Often we'll see, I think, poor eating choices, so lots more starches, lots less vegetables and things like that. And we see that even in young kids who are put in front of the TV. We know that screen time is something that we also think about quite a bit with kids. And so when we're talking about eating dinner or breakfast in front of the TV, we're already adding half an hour, 2 hours onto kids' TV watching time in the day, and that just leads again to some unhealthy lifestyle habits, sedentary lifestyle. So we want to think about some of these things and preventing them with the kind of set family meal time. Some of the more problematic outcomes that we see as clinical problems are things like obesity. So not being able to control how much you're eating or eating calorie-rich foods and not making good, healthy choices. Picky eating is also something that we see happening when there's not the kind of family meal time that we would suggest. And picky eating is something, again, that's pretty normative, especially in the toddler and preschool years, and can fade after that. but it can be really extreme if we set habits around it that really ingrain that in the child, and I'll talk about that a little bit too. In older kids, we see higher instances of eating disorders when there's not a family meal time. Part of that might be because there are poor family models of eating. Part of that might be because we're not monitoring how our teens are eating. But that's something to keep in mind because that is something that can really affect their long-term health. And then other health problems as well. So things like diabetes, heart problems, things like this are all part and parcel with our eating habits. So giving good eating habits to our kids is something that we can do to give them lifelong health. Another thing that parents are often concerned about is poor manners. So this could be things like putting their elbows on the table, but it could also be things like interrupting conversations and not really being able to listen to the flow of conversations around a table. So we want to think about our family mealtime as a time to also model and promote some of the manners we want our kids to go out into the world with. This could be anything from which silverware to use to how to politely decline something they don't like to eat, being able to just really kind of use the manners that we would like them to use when they're out in the world without us or at restaurants with us. And this is the perfect time to practice that. So these are some of the things that we think are really important about family mealtime. And really, I can't stress enough how much you are a model. Your relationship with food is a model for your kids. Okay. So knowing that this is very important, and I believe you guys are all tuning in because you believe so too, let's try and set this up for success. So one of the things you want to think ahead about is if you're not having a lot of family meals, you need to think about when a good time would be to have these meals. When can the family meet? And keep in mind, we all have really busy schedules. So you might want to think about whether or not dinner is the best time. We call it dinner time, but what if you could meet all at breakfast time? Really don't limit yourself to thinking about this as only being a weekend activity. If at all possible, really try to think about how often you can make this work and try and set this up ahead of time with your family. This might mean that you have 20 to 30 minutes together. And that's totally sufficient, especially with younger kids. That's about the time limit that they might be able to sit still. So you want to think about setting expectations with your family. If you guys are used to eating separately or ordering on Seamless like my family does, you want to think about how can we set expectations ahead of time so everyone knows this is going to be a priority. And then pick a time that most people or everyone can meet. One of the things that I think is really important in setting expectations is letting kids know especially what's allowed at the dinner table and what's not. Very often this means we have to think about electronics. We don't want the TV on in the background. We also don't want the iPad at the table. And even things like books and newspaper, as much as we want to see kids reading, we really want to think about how those detract from their attention to the meal and their attention to their family. So I do know families that like to bring maybe a clipping to the table to kind of start conversation with older kids. And I think that that's not really what we're talking about. That's still kind of very communal. But thinking about having everybody with their own entertainment at the table is something that we want to try to avoid. We also want to avoid a lot of noise. So while like maybe low music might be okay in the background, you want to really make meal time kind of a focus of the family at that moment. So you want to get rid of any distractions you can think of at that time. One of the things that we also really kind of, I think, overlook is how are we going to promote good conversation and communication during this time. I said I want you guys to enjoy this dinner time. So one of the things that you can do to help with this is avoid some pitfalls of common conversations at the dinner table. You can take this with you to Thanksgiving as well if you'd like. Talk about things that are pleasant to everybody. So for example, if there's a hot button issue in your family, dinner time might not be the best time to discuss this because we want everyone to be enjoying their time at the table. One of the things that we talk about often is how to avoid food talk. Food talk is things like, eat 3 more bites. I see that you left your vegetables there. Let's have some more, and really focusing on eating habits at the table as opposed to other things that are more about someone's day or something that's on their mind. So you don't want to talk about those kinds of things. But you might want to talk about, oh, how did you prepare this food? It tastes so good today, or it tastes different. I really like that you added the seasoning to the broccoli today. So you want to think about how you can maybe promote subtly some of the healthy eating that you want your kids to pick up on. So maybe by saying that it tastes good or what you like about it or how did you prepare it. But food talk is really something that we don't want to make it the focus of what we're doing. We want to say, how much more are you eating? Do you want more? What else did you eat today? We want to kind of avoid some of that food talk. With adolescents as well, if we're worried about their diet, this is not the time to talk to them about their weight or their food choices. These are the kinds of things that are going to make everybody want to avoid dinner. One of the things that we often also do as parents is we say, how was school today? Or how was your day? And the kid patented answer is fine. And that doesn't really lead to much conversation. So we also want to think ahead about how can we find out about our kids' days without necessarily asking that pitfall question. One of the things that I like to do is to maybe tell a story first. So say, oh, I saw the strangest thing today, and then describe something I know my kids will think is funny. So you want to start the conversation off without necessarily asking a bunch of questions, but really kind of just opening the floor for people to make observations and feel at ease. One of the other things you might want to do is start a tradition. So you could start like a best thing that happened to me today, worst thing that happened to me today tradition. You might want to talk about conversation starters and have them on the table. You might want to try to make it a nice kind of complimentary thing that happens around the table, so things that you guys are thankful for or things that you appreciated about other family members in that day. So you want to try and make it as pleasant as possible for everyone to be at the table sharing time together. The other thing that you really want to think about in setting this up is you're meeting for family meals, you're going to make it a routine. You really want to stick to that routine and give it time to work. At first, it might not be super pleasant. If people are used to kind of being able to watch TV or do their own thing, there might be a little pushback, but if you can stick with it and stick to the expectations and not change the goalpost a lot, this will really start to become something that everybody looks forward to and just expects. Okay. One of the other things you really want to think about, and this comes from Ellen Satter, who's a great food researcher. You can look her up on Google. She has a wonderful website. Is that you have a role and a responsibility during feeding for kids, and kids have responsibilities as well. And if we can keep this division of responsibilities, food becomes less of a struggle for families, and we can start to see really healthy eating habits forming. So Ellen Satter recommends that parents be responsible for when kids eat. This is not just dinner time, so this is all food presentation. Where they eat, so this is why we're talking about eating at the table. And then what they eat. So parents are making the decisions about what they're serving every night. And then kids have a responsibility as well. They're going to decide if they eat. So this is the really, really hard one, especially for those little tiny toddlers in the 5th percentile, and you're always worried about keeping their weight up. But if they eat is actually the child's responsibility. Kids have built-in understanding of their cues, of whether or not they're hungry or they're full, and we need to let them continue to listen to that and not mess it up by kind of continually trying to push food on them. Kids also decide how much they're going to eat. And as much as we would love them to pick all healthy foods, they're not going to, and that's okay. So we want to give that division of responsibility real weight at the dinner table because it's going to make everything go well, and we know that it leads to really healthy outcomes as kids grow up and make their own choices. Okay, food is also obviously a very important consideration here. So what do we serve and how? You want to think about being able to serve things with a variety. This graphic on the right here is the recommendation for what percentage of your plate should be taken up by each of these things. So you want to think about a variety of proteins, vegetables, fruits, starches, and you want to serve this family style. And what I mean by this is having a big bowl of whatever you're going to serve. So if it's green beans, rice, and chicken, you want to have that in the middle of the table and present it all at once to everyone at the table. And then everybody can take their servings. You might need to help your kids with their serving, obviously. And you want to think about, for your kids that are a little bit picky, having at least one thing on the table every day that you know that they pretty much like. So we're not making short order cooks here. We want to really think about making a dinner for everybody, having all the food there and available on the table, and then people can eat what they're going to eat. I know that I need lots of meal shortcuts because I work full time and so does my husband. So we think about how are we going to prioritize mealtime, and we use meal shortcuts. So things like we do order food sometimes, and we still try to stick to the same kind of presentation so that there's both vegetables and proteins on the plate, that there's some healthy fats, there's some carbs, and that they're presented on the table in its entirety, and we all split it up. You can also use those new meal prep services that send you all the ingredients, and so it kind of cuts into how much time it takes to prepare meals. Also thinking about investing in like a slow cooker or something that can cook the meal while you're at work. We use a lot of leftovers, or thinking about freezing meals ahead of time and cooking when you have time and then pulling it out and just having to heat it up or reheat it. So once we're making this a priority, some of the planning that goes into this is really, how do I get food into all members of my family? And so you want to think about how you can do that ahead of time. Now, this is really what we're thinking about when we talk about bringing everybody to the table. There are a lot of common issues that people are dealing with during dinner time. Anything from keeping little ones seated to eating what the family is eating. So we don't want to have, again, 5 dinners for 5 members of the family. Any arguments at the table. Those manners, again, being able to chew with our mouth closed, using utensils instead of hands, things like that. And then what I call the slow eaters and no eaters, who kind of really drag out mealtime and have a hard time getting through the meal. If we refer back to Ellen Satter's ideas about who's responsible for what, we can help kind of shape this behavior to become more healthy by limiting how long dinner lasts. So 20 to 30 minutes for especially younger kids is completely sufficient for a mealtime. And what that means is, for slow eaters, we're going to do things like end mealtime, and so whatever they ate in that 20 or 30 minutes is what they ate. And they'll start to remember the next day, oh, I was still hungry, or I wasn't finished, and you can gently remind them of this, and they'll start to be able to eat kind of in a more normal pace at the dinner time and during the time that's allotted to them. For staying seated, we want to think about, for example, working towards longer periods of staying seated. We might not necessarily be able to move from running around the table and leaving to go get a favorite toy to sitting for 30 minutes. So we might need to break that into steps. Eating what the family is eating, again, we want to think about, for those kids that only eat chicken nuggets, how do we move them to being able to experiment and eat different foods and enjoy different foods? And then for arguments, we think about things like avoiding topics that are sensitive issues. For kids, it's often test performance, so we don't want to talk about a bad grade at the dinner table. We want to avoid lots of commentary on their attitude. We don't want to first point out their bad manners and then start to try and get them engaged. We might want to engage them and then make a gentle reminder to sit up or to use their fork, things like that. We don't want to start off with, why are you slouching at the table? That's really going to kind of turn a kid off and not want to keep them there. And then for manners, again, we are models. So we can model good manners. We can ask for and demonstrate what good manners look like and be very kind of in a cheerleader way. Wow, that was so great. Look, you put your napkin in your lap right away. Good job. And then for the slow eaters, again, you can remind them to eat. That's not a bad thing. But you don't want to kind of bend those rules and those responsibilities that Ellen Satter's given us. You really want to stick to those so that your child knows what they're working towards. We're really talking about breaking bad habits here. And there's a general formula for this, meaning we take steps to create a new habit. And those need to be broken down. So pick a goal, talk about the goal with your child, and then break it into steps that are manageable so that you're not kind of trying to do it all at once. You might need to incentivize this, meaning you might need to praise it a lot, you might need to notice it when it's happening a lot, or you might need to actually, excuse me, make rewards. And I don't want this reward to be dessert, and we can talk about dessert in the Q&A a little bit. It should really be something that's not anything to do with mealtime or food. Really, really, really important is that you want to stick with this. This is not something that's necessarily going to change overnight. These are bad habits, and habits take time to be broken. Ellen Satter gives the example that children may never eat vegetables until adolescence, but if they're always on the table, it's somehow getting in there that this is something that they should do for their health. Be realistic in your goals. If you have a lot, pick 1 or 2 and try to pick kind of what we call the low-hanging fruit and do those first. And then as we shape that behavior at the dinner table to be more and more where you want it to be, then you can add in new goals. And then finally, get your kids involved with mealtime by helping them figure out some meal plans. So what would they like to serve at the table? Having them come shopping with you or help you prep or cook the food, help you clean up, And again, this is all to bring them into this so that it's not something that's happening to them, but they're involved with and it's part of the family. Okay. So I'm going to bring in my special guest now, Bridget Murphy. Come on in. And we're going to answer some of your questions, and we have some as well in case you guys are not thinking about all the things that can come into mealtime.
Okay. So hi, I'm Bridget Murphy. I am the registered dietitian and certified diabetes educator here at the Child Study Center. So I do a lot of picky eating and a lot of eating disorders. It's kind of the main thing that I do here. So we'll take some of your questions, and then we have some questions prepared as well. So I'll read this question to you. If you start too late to practice this, kids and teens now, how do you start doing it strategically so this can become a reality?
That's a great question. I think about this because I know that we all start with bad habits in this area, I think. I always tell parents to think about starting with something realistic. With teens, you don't necessarily have to worry, for example, about how long they're going to be sitting there. Usually you can kind of make an announcement, we're having dinner together. But then when you're having that dinner together, you do want to still provide some expectations and let them know why you're doing it. And with teens, you can be a little bit more transparent about this because it's healthy for us. It's going to give us good habits because it's important to me that I get to, have contact with you because I don't get to see you all day. So those are some of the things that we try to do, and then we pick maybe certain days that work for them that don't feel like they're cutting into homework time or fun time, so that at first it's kind of palatable, and then we build upon that. Do you have anything to add?
No, I think that kind of reiterating some of your points of, saying dinner is at 6:30, maybe setting up certain days that you're going to do it, but also trying to get teens involved that more nutritionally that's age appropriate. So your 2-year-old, you're not going to say necessarily what's for dinner tonight, but maybe seeing, do they want to be involved in cooking dinner and preparing dinner, give them a little bit more ownership over the entire event. And so they're going to be more actively engaged in that, and they're going to be more willing to try some of the food that they've prepared now too.
Yeah, and I think the conversation becomes doubly important for adolescents. So really thinking about what are hot button issues that we should avoid so that conversation is pleasant at dinner.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see another one.
I don't know if we have 2 more on here. See, I don't know if there's one of these that you want to go through.
Can you explain why requiring kids to clean their plates is a bad idea?
So this goes back to Ellen Satter's division of responsibility. So when we go through the Clean Plate Club, which I think probably we both grew up with, of who's supposed to be cleaning the plate there, it instills that you have to finish all of the food on your plate. It becomes like this food war. So it's just a matter of food modeling. Maybe you only take as much as you're going to eat. Maybe the next day when they start taking extra mashed potatoes or something like that they didn't finish the previous day, you could remind them, yesterday you took a little bit too much. Maybe take some just as you go, and that can help to reiterate that they're not going to get too full from eating too much at that given time.
And can you tell them a little bit more about this idea that kids actually know when they're full when they're little, and that we as parents kind of mess that up?
Yeah, so it's interesting. And from day one, you are establishing some sort of schedule, right? So when you have a new baby, you try to get them on a feeding schedule. Yeah, they're eating every 8 to 11 hours. 8 to 11 times a day. But ultimately, you want to get them on some sort of schedule so that you're sleeping too. And so this is what you're trying to establish with your kids, and this is where the when comes in, that you're establishing, breakfast, lunch, snack, dinner, snack is at these different times. And so for the kids, I think they actually are able to moderate how full or not full they are. And it's typically the research has shown that it's up to the age 3 or 4 that they're really in tune with their hunger satiety cues. So if they take that one bite and they say that they're full, that really means they're full. Mm-hmm. A lot of times we hear these stories of like little kids who are craving butter, or they'll eat butter straight from like the butter stick, and that's actually indicative of what nutrients they're missing. So if they're not having enough fat in their diet, they're going to crave those things, and they're super in tune to it. So let them kind of embrace those things. If they ask for something, if they want another helping of butter on top of their vegetables, that might not necessarily be a bad thing. So kind of listening to the kids.
Thank you. And I saw that the next question is from somebody wondering, how do we start conversations with our very quiet kids? So I can start with this a little bit. I think that this can be a challenge, and again, one of those things that's a process. It might not get better right away, but you really want to think about having a hook. So what's something that's already interesting to them? An easy one in my house is wow, can you believe Christmas is already coming? What should we get for everybody this year? That's usually something that they'd love to talk about because they like to throw in what they would like as well. Or think about something that you know that they're interested in. For young boys, very often that can be video games and Minecraft. So it's okay to start conversations in those places. You just really want to think about being open, reflecting what you hear them saying so that they don't feel like they have to always just answer questions. And what I mean by reflecting is saying things like, oh, you had a really long battle in Minecraft today. I don't know if they're battles, but you might just say back to them what you hear so that they can kind of expand on it in whichever direction they want to, as opposed to saying, well, what's that mean? Or what's this? Which really does actually kind of take the control away from the child in the conversation and put it back in our domain. And kids don't love that all the time because they get asked questions all day. So trying to kind of just keep a really open stance and be a really good listener. And over time, you're going to hear more and more from your kids. Okay.
We have more questions.
This one?
Oh, yeah. So what are some engaging activities that can be used at the dinner table?
Okay. Do you have any ideas? Or?
Well, I think some of the things that we've talked about before is with those conversation pieces, you don't want to have a lot of distractors, so you don't want to be bringing toys or bringing books, as Lauren was saying earlier. But I think kind of engaging in, there was this new vegetable, what was the most interesting, what's the different piece of this vegetable, talking about those types of things, and then trying to take it away from some of the food conversation pieces. We're going to see grandma this weekend. Who is most excited for the drive? Or are you more excited for when we go play in her yard, when we play with her dog? Those types of things to try to kind of take it away from the food right in front of them, I think is important.
For older kids, again, I think sometimes it can be helpful to have some kind of conversation starter. So there are little games you can buy that have question starters. So it's kind of like what if this happened? And it's kind of just a fun kind of exercise in conversation. Or what would you do if this happened to you? Or would you rather have, pink hair or purple lips? And so it's those kinds of things that can just kind of get everybody in a lighthearted mood and kind of a more game-playing conversation. My family used to bring current events to the table when we got older. And so they would ask us, oh, are your friends talking about the election? Or are your friends... And so we would start to talk about things in that way, and that wasn't a hot button issue in our household. And so that changes as kids get older. So you might want to think about what's important to them, or what you want to instill in them, and kind of include that as part of your table time activities.
Okay, so what if your partner isn't keen on family dinner? How do you create a special family time and show it's important?
Make them watch this webinar. I think really giving people information, everybody wants what's best for their kids. So I think giving people information about why it might be important to start this tradition, if it's not already happening, is really one thing that you can do to ensure that it's happening. And also deal with the reality of living in the city and having important, busy things to do. You might not always have everybody at the table, but if you can kind of model it for everyone that you think it's important and get as many people to the table as possible, I think that's another thing that can start to kind of just get it to seep into the family tradition and routines. Do you have any other ideas?
Yeah, I think sometimes people, their resistance isn't necessarily because they don't want to have a family dinner, but it's logistics. I just know I'm not going to be able to get home for 8:30. I'm going to constantly disappoint you that I'm not getting home on time. How do we deal with that? And so one of the things Lauren said at the beginning was the breakfast idea. Mm-hmm. Can you take 20 or 30 minutes in the morning? Maybe it's actually only 15 minutes, but are you all sitting around and just enjoying your breakfast, enjoying your coffee, whatever it is, just to take that extra time to let your kids know that you are paying attention to them and that they matter on the day-to-day basis. I think that's really important. And weekends might be the easiest time. This is not necessarily a 7-day-a-week kind of expectation. Even growing up, I had family dinners. It was a very important part. Even when we still go home, we have family dinner, but we definitely did not have it Monday through Sunday.
All right, so we have time for one last question. What are your thoughts on food mistakes that parents make time and time again?
I think the biggest food mistake that I hear is the snacks, the after-school snacks.
Yes.
Kids come home and they're totally ravenous. You look in their lunchbox and they didn't even eat their lunch. They left back all these pieces of it. And not only are they so hungry, but they're very specifically hungry. You know, the ice cream man I see outside of every elementary school, or the hot dog or whatever it is. So I think the biggest pitfall is kind of leaning into those impromptu snacks that you get at CVS or something like that.
Right. And I think just not being able to, again, take those responsibilities across the day and not just at mealtime, but thinking about when are these kids going to be eating, and trying to restrict not kind of open grazing all day, but really picking a snack time, and then cutting that snack time off and then waiting for the next meal. None of us are going to starve to death, even if we miss a meal completely. So really thinking about having them start healthy eating habits by kind of letting kids know when they're eating and when they need to make sure that they're paying attention to eating, because they're not going to get food again until the next meal time.
And that they're getting the snack at that time. But it's just that parents are still in charge of the what. So when they get their snacks, they can have, you can have a snack, you can have fruit, or you can have vegetables. Oh, I don't want to eat either of those. Okay, well, dinner's going to be at 6 o'clock. So
Well, thank you very much for joining me. On behalf of the Child Studies Center, thank you for joining me today. Once you leave the webinar, you're going to receive a survey, and we would appreciate if you could complete that for us. And you'll also receive a follow-up email within a day or two with a link to today's recording. And for our next webinar, we hope you can join us. It's going to be Dr. Stephanie Wagner talking about rewarding kids for good behavior. Is this a bad idea? Oh, a good idea. That's going to be on Tuesday, December 5th at 1 p.m. Thanks again.